The UN agency helping refugees in Gaza says it will have to halt its operations there unless more fuel is delivered. It says its supplies will run out later today. Israel's military is refusing to allow fuel into Gaza, accusing the militant group Hamas, which runs the territory, of hoarding supplies. Israel imposed a blockade on Gaza after Hamas's terrorist attack on October 7th. Only limited supplies of food, water and medicine have been allowed in. The fuel shortage is hindering emergency services that are already stretched to the limit.
The blood-stained wreckage of an ambulance in Gaza. It was destroyed by the blast from an Israeli airstrike, but it will serve one last purpose.
We're running out of fuel, so we have been taking petrol and diesel from the damaged ambulances and using it to fuel the ones that are working.
But without fuel, many fear emergency services could grind to a halt.
More important than anything else is fuel. So far, fuel has not been allowed into the Strip. Fuel is extremely urgent because without fuel, the trucks themselves cannot move. Without fuel, the generators cannot produce electricity for hospitals, for bakeries, and for the water desalination plants.
Only a trickle of aid has been allowed into Gaza, with Israel consistently barring fuel, concerned that it will be used in Hamas's operations. Aside from the airstrikes, Israel has imposed a complete blockade on the Strip following Hamas's terrorist attacks on October the 7th. But Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is seeking international support for a ceasefire and the opening of a humanitarian corridor.
We demand a complete ceasefire and the opening of permanent corridors for humanitarian relief, the entry of medicine and food, and the provision of water, electricity, fuel and other basic needs.
With more and more ambulances destroyed and fuel running out, Gaza's emergency services could soon be forced to shut down at a time when their work is more important than ever.
Let's bring in DW's Tanya Kramer here. She's in Jerusalem. Tanya, the lack of fuel in Gaza is making an already desperate humanitarian situation even worse. Has anyone suggested ideas on how fuel could be allowed in exclusively for humanitarian use without it falling into the hands of Hamas militants?
Not so far, because the Israeli government has refused to allow fuel in. They're saying, as you said, as we heard in this report also, that they don't, out of the concern that it would end up in the hands of Hamas, they also claim that Hamas still has reserves of fuel in Gaza. Now, it's hard to tell also what's going on behind the scenes when it comes to the hostage talks that are held in Gaza, because there were some indication that that might be also related, what is going in and out of Gaza. These mediations are done indirectly by Qatar in Egypt. Now, the Rafah crossing, the Sou crossing that works, might be then, used also as a tool, what comes in and out, that has been heavily criticized, of course, by human rights and humanitarian aid organizations. There's also pressure in Israel by the far right and also by some of the hostage families, not all, that no humanitarian aid should go in, but UN agencies and other humanitarian agencies say that there are mechanisms to allow fuel in, so this is still at a dispute right now.
There's huge international pressure on the Israeli government, Tanya, to ease the humanitarian situation in Gaza. What impact is that pressure having on Israel?
Well, so far we don't see anything changing, because what we're seeing is that aid is slowly trickling in. There are only dozens of trucks that have entered the Gaza Strip, which has been totally closed off from any aid entering since the beginning of the war, like almost now 3 weeks ago. We saw some trucks going in on Saturday and Sunday, and humanitarian organizations say this is far from being enough for the over 2 1.2 million population, the civilian population, that is actually suffering, from all of this. So the UN Refugee Agency, UNRWA, has said they will run out of fuel and other supplies if nothing comes in on Wednesday, and they have pressured that, supplies, that there will more trucks coming in. Of course, we also have to take into consideration there is a war going on. Airstrikes have been intensified. There are also some rocket fires still coming out of Gaza. But it's also very difficult for this aid then to be distributed to people in the Gaza Strip. And only now we are hearing also maybe some change also in the US position, but also others saying there might have to be a need for a humanitarian pause. We're not talking here about a ceasefire, but a pause so that some more aid could be going in, and that could also actually then reach the people, the civilian population that is suffering here at the moment the most.
Tanya, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Tanya Kramer, in Jerusalem. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres is facing heavy criticism after comments he made at a UN Security Council meeting in New York. The UN chief criticized Israel's bombardment of Gaza and urged an end to what he described as the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. His remarks drew a sharp response from Israel.
There were heated exchanges at the UN Security Council meeting in New York. As the war in Gaza rages on, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned that the situation was growing more dire by the hour. He repeated his condemnation of the Hamas terror attacks and reiterated his call for a humanitarian ceasefire.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. The relentless bombardment of Gaza by Israeli forces, the level of civilian casualties, and the wholesale destruction of neighborhoods continue to mount and are deeply alarming.
Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen responded angrily to the comments.
Mr. Secretary General, in what world do you live? Definitely, this is not our world.
He later cancelled his meeting with Guterres. Israel's ambassador to the UN went a step further.
The UN is failing, and you, Mr. Secretary General, have lost all morality and impartiality. I think that the Secretary General must resign.
Outside UNHQ, relatives of some of the hostages held a rally. They laid pairs of shoes to show solidarity with the hostages. Later, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken asked the Security Council to back a new US-led resolution which called for humanitarian pauses, but not a ceasefire. However, Russia said it would veto anything short of a full ceasefire. So with the UN now in deadlock, a diplomatic solution to the crisis seems a very distant prospect.